Exciting to have you all here today for our early years programme launch in Windsor and Maidenhead. I'm Amy Joynes. I work for Whole Education and I have a number of roles, one of them being to lead the Whole Education Early Years School Improvement Programme. And I also run the local authority aspects of our work as well. So today's exciting because it's kind of combining work with local authority and the early years programme, which is brilliant. So also on the call, just by way of a couple of introductions, you can see Meredith, who I mentioned earlier. So Meredith will be very much kind of in the background, making sure everything functions and works for us today. If you have got any problems or anything, please do put comments in the chat that Meredith can pick up and resolve anything for you. Also on the call, we have Helen Huntley, who lots of you will know and who will be talking to you in a moment. And we have our early years expert, Sarah Quinn, who is doing the majority of delivery today. As you will have noticed, Meredith has hit the record button. We are recording today's session, but we will pause when we kind of go to breaks and things like that. Hopefully on the call, we've got all our early years leads who are taking part in the programme. And also, hopefully, many of your head teachers. What would be really helpful for us is if you have more than one person in the room, so you might be in the same room sharing the screen, if you could just pop in the chat which school you are and who else is in the room with you, if it's more than just the name that's appearing on the screen, that'd be great, because then it helps us to register exactly who has come along to the event today. So unless I've missed anything, Meredith, I will carry on, and I'm going to do just a few slides just to explain and introduce you to the programme. And then as quickly as possible, I'll be handing over to Sarah, who is going to talk to you far more in depth about the purpose, the importance of the work that you're embarking on, and take you through the first stages of the programme of work. Okay, so Whole Education is an organisation that delivers a number of different pieces of work. The early years programme is one. We do a lot of work around special educational needs, and we have a huge and growing network of members who belong to us because of the work that we largely do with adults. We don't tend to work on the ground with children. That's your role. We do lots and lots of work to develop leaders in various forms. We have peer groups that are set up who kind of visit each other's classrooms, and all sorts of different pieces of work that go on. And as members of Whole Education through the programme, you will have access to that network, which I'll mention a little bit more about at the end of the session today. So from a Whole Education point of view, one of the reasons that we've established this early years programme is that it is incredibly important for us that we develop your knowledge, your skills, to enable you as a learner yourself, as well as the learners that you are working with, to thrive in our world, which is constantly changing, as you know. And the work that you will see today will be obviously completely relevant to you and your role. But one of the reasons for establishing this particular programme is because early years is the start of the journey for children, isn't it? As they enter into education, it is absolutely pivotal that this phase of learning has the level of priority and importance that it needs to have for our children to thrive throughout their whole learning journey. So I'm going to hand over very briefly to Helen, who's just going to put today's session and this programme in context for you in a kind of Windsor and Maidenhead context. So Helen, is it okay to hand over to you?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all from Sarah Cotland. I can't believe that I haven't got Sarah's name on this slide, because she is actually very, very important to this programme. I am a SEND consultant working for the Royal Borough, but I'm currently also leading on the Delivering Better Values programme, and it is that money from that grant that is paying for this, for us to be able to engage with Whole Education. We're delighted that so many of you are here. We absolutely understand the pressures on you as a small school. Many of you, first schools and infant schools, are very small schools. So thank you very much for finding the time to be with us. I'm going to introduce you to Sarah now. Sarah is not only the executive head teacher of 3 of our nurseries in the borough, she's also a member of the RBWM School Improvement Team. And she has, as I say, a very important part to play. So could we have the next slide? And I'm going to hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Helen. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction, but I'm going to talk through the next slide. So I really echo what Amy said, and thank you, Amy, because you took all the words I've written down to introduce this slide about the level of priority that's needed for early years. And those of you who I know on the call will know that's where I firmly sit and believe. And an opportunity really for us to develop this programme for us as leaders in early years, and to take our head teachers alongside with us and our Senkos as well, to have that professional discussion about what our little people need to enable them to thrive. So Helen, as I said, Helen Huntley has been leading on this project with our other school leaders, and some of which are on the call for that primary phase, that Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. But it was really exciting when she came to me and said that she's thinking of doing an early years strand. And of course, that the importance of that. So I'm not going to read that slide, but you can see that importance, that early intervention for us to kind of give our children and think about what the diet our children need at this age and stage so they can thrive. And as Helen said, that building on that work that we've done across the school, we're very unique. We sit in that lovely unique curriculum, national curriculum. So yeah, so actually, and that building that capacity for us as leaders. I think, Helen, I've kind of said, and is there anything else you want to add to that in terms of the context?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Sarah. Could we have the next slide, please? So I think I have to thank Amy for this slide, actually. So if you could just click again, there's eventually 4 cogs. So this is the work we've been doing with the Delivering Better Values. As Sarah said, last year we started with since January, we've been starting with the SEND element of this school improvement programme. And we were also doing some very important work with our post-16s as well. I'll say a little bit more about school readiness in the next slide, but this is where the early year fits in. And it's not by mistake that it's in the middle of these cogs. So thank you to Amy, but we just wanted to give you an overview of where this work fits into the whole picture of what we're doing within the Royal Borough. Thank you. So the next slide, please.
I think this is back to me. So this is just an overview really of what's going on in the LA. So those of you who work with Helen McHale may or may not know that she is edging into her lovely retirement and relocating. She's around for this term, but we have a new early years area Senko. Catherine Wood, I believe her name is, but I'm sure that will come out in some more comms. She just covers nurseries and the preschools, but we have a new area Senko, Anne Robinson, who will be coming out to you, who work in primary, first and infant schools. She's taken over from the Kelly Nash role, working with the local authority. You should know by now, hopefully, we have the anchor. So that's part of our school readiness intervention. So children that is come to us at the Lawns. It's a bungalow that's been adapted for children of reception and year 1 age who are finding it difficult to regulate within a mainstream classroom and need further support. We also have been working with heads really across all key stages for a school readiness working party. So we know working in schools that those transitions, whichever age our children are, whether they're 3, 4, 5, 7, all the different transitions that go on as well in Windsor, that's really a key friction point for children to disengage, parents to find that transition difficult as well. Sometimes we see different behaviours at those transition times. So we're really trying to be unpicking how we might be able to support children and their families as well. So Helen's been leading on that. Helen Huntley's been leading on that across our secondary colleagues as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Those are our 4 slides. I'm going to hand back to whole education. But as I say, I hope you can feel the energy and the enthusiasm from Sarah and I in this work. And we'd just like to thank whole education for giving us the opportunity to join this programme. So handing back to whole education. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Helen and Sarah. And I think it's really exciting for us. And one of the reasons I made that slide is because I absolutely believe that getting it right in the early years is pivotal You've got obviously children coming into school and making sure they're ready, and then getting it right in the early years is kind of the beginning for children, whether they're regardless of SEND, but actually thinking about their long journey right the way through to adulthood, and that starting point. And I didn't mention at the start, but I am nearly 30 years teacher myself. Actually started in early years, a long career in special educational needs, a Senko and things, and actually found myself in 2015 as a secondary school head teacher. So somehow weaved way along, as we do as teachers, suddenly find ourselves somewhere that we can't remember how we ever got there. And so actually from that point of view, you know, even as a secondary head, and in hindsight looking back now, that understanding of how important that journey is before they even get to you at that age is crucial. So I'm really passionate about this programme and how well it delivers to support our young children on their journeys, and from this programme's point of view, particularly to work with and support you. And one of the things that, just to mention as well, as Helen said, there are lots of schools across the borough who have been taking part in the SEND programme either last year or joining the programme this year, quite a significant number of schools now. But that does mean that some of you are very familiar with some of the whole education work. And so head teachers, there will be a little bit of this. If you've been to the SEND launch, you will have heard a little bit of what I'm about to say. Sarah Quinn, who'll be coming on the call in a moment, we'll be purely talking about the importance of early years. So you'll see some familiarity across the way, the structure of the two programmes. So just what we're starting off with is just a senior leaders guide, really, for the first part of the session today. We should finish that one about 9:30, as long as I talk quickly in the introduction. And understand, obviously, things happen in schools. We've already had one school who couldn't come this morning because they had that dreaded call yesterday. But it's great that as many head teachers as possible are able to stay through with us. We'll have a short break then, and then it'll be very much about the early years leaders guide throughout the session. And Sarah and I kind of met on Friday, Sarah Quinn and myself, and said we'll see how things go in terms of needing another break, but we may be able to go through that whole session. We'll see how we're going, and we aim to finish by 12 o'clock. As you know, this is being recorded. It's great if you've got cameras on. It's really nice for the presenter to be able to see some faces. And please do use the chat if you've got any questions. If anything's not working for you, please do pop things in the chat. We do ask that it's engaged. We want this to be as interactive as possible. This is a learning opportunity for you. Please ask questions, and there will be moments where Sarah will want you to kind of interact and participate. As we're a relatively small group, sometimes when we do our launches, we'll do it to kind of 6, 7, 8 trusts with kind of 20 schools each in very, very big rooms. And we split off into lots of breakouts. As you're a group from the same area, largely we're going to try and promote discussion amongst the group, but we may use some breakout rooms as well. And please do feel kind of that you can be open and honest. I'm sure some of you know each other fairly well already. So I'm not going to read through the slide, but you will see as you go through the session this morning, and as you embark on your journey with us on this programme, the key emphasis of this programme is about your leadership of early years. It's about helping to develop you as practitioners and as leaders, and to be able to work really effectively with your teams and as was mentioned earlier, with your senior leadership team. You will notice that there are headings within this programme that are familiar to Ofsted. That's intentional. As much as the programme doesn't exist to help Ofsted, it's really important for you that you have the confidence to be able to have one thing that will help you across the all aspects of your work. And so to be able to link this to kind of conversations you may have to have, school improvement plans, which are very often based around the kind of framework of Ofsted with the same headings, is important. And most importantly, this is about, like I say, your development and your professional support. And ultimately, it will improve outcomes. And by that, we don't mean what children get when they get finished in reception, their outcomes for life, improving their whole journey through education and how they can access that. So the core of the programme, the early years programme and our SEND programme, so those of you who are involved in both will see some familiarity here. They're very much set up around a core process that takes place, and then there's lots of additional things that sit around that. So largely in the first kind of term, you will take part in today's launch event. You will complete a self-evaluation, which helps you to identify the areas that you need to develop and work on, and That needs to be undertaken with leaders within your school. So it's a shared plan. That then will support you to develop an action plan. So we will talk about that in our second session where we all come together, called Planning for Impactful Change, where you will then go on and develop action plans, which we will then support you with in terms of the quality of the actions to make improvement. So we're not going to tell you whether they're the right actions or the wrong actions. It's very much about how will that action help you to move things forward in your provision. We will also be, and I think some of you may be aware of this already, working with a set of coaches. So we will be organising you into kind of peer groups to work together with a coach alongside you to support you. So there'll be an element of training as well for those coaches. Once you've done your self-evaluation and completed your action plan, you'll then be focused on working together as a group to move those actions forward through the rest of the year. Again, supported by your coach, supported by ourselves, very much supported and driven by Sarah as well, I imagine. So you will meet together regularly throughout the year to work on those actions and develop those, with hopefully the aim that towards the end of this year, you'll be able to go back, revisit that self-evaluation and celebrate how much you've improved and driven things forward in your schools. And at the bottom there, you can see that running throughout the year, we would expect, as you will be very used to, those action plans becoming a working document, a kind of reference point for you all the time to go back to in terms of what did you decide to prioritize? Because we know, don't we, as teachers, we quite often set ourselves like 5,000 priorities because we want everything to be as good as it possibly can be for our children. So the action planning process is very much about identifying the most important for your development, move your school forward. So it's a constant revisit throughout the year. I'll talk about the digital network a bit later, but you'll have access throughout the year to the digital network where you can go in and find resources and training and different webinars and things that you can attend. And that's available all year round, as well as a very specific program of CPD that sits alongside it. I'm not going to run through this whole page because we're going to come back to the end, but it just demonstrates the level of depth within this program in terms of how much support you'll be getting, the training that will be sitting around it throughout the whole year, and the way in which the process all fits together into an academic year. So I mentioned the professional development. There are two strands of this. There are 7 sessions, and these link directly to the self-evaluation framework that you will be able to register for, log in and attend as early years leads within your school. So these are very much aimed at every school's early years lead. And they will be delivered across the year, as you can see there, spaced out to focus on particular areas and help you with your own development. And again, I'll put these back up at the end so that you've got all these. Sitting alongside that is what we call system leader events. So these are for, we have large MATs that work with us who will have an early years MAT lead. So they would attend. They're open to our local authority leads. So they're about the leaders of the system, if you like, and they will be able to access an additional layer of training that's really looking at things at that higher strategic level. So again, a strand that runs right the way through the year of training that leaders can opt into. So just to kind of piece that all together before I hand over to Sarah, this is very much, as you will see, about you thinking about your own situation in your school, your self-evaluation. You'll be very used to a kind of plan, do, review model, I am sure. And so this is about you reflecting, you thinking about what it is you need to do to improve, and then working together with the opportunity to tap into as much training and support as you need along the way, kind of in an action research model, if you like, thinking about what you need and how you're going to work to develop yourselves. There is also an option, and we'll talk about this in the very first training session later in the month, for those of you who come along. There is an option to actually take part explicitly in some action research around this. So taking an area that you want to develop from your action plan and working with others to move that forward during the course of the year. So it's very much about how you develop yourself based upon your findings within your own school and your settings. So just to give you a little bit of a glimpse, and these for your Evaluate My School self-evaluation system have all been sent this morning. So they are all live. So after this session today, you can go straight into that and log in if you want to. And we are always on hand to support people if there's any challenges around that or not finding a way around the system at all. And when you go on there, you will find these 7 areas, and Sarah's going to go into these in depth a little bit later. 7 areas that you will evaluate yourself on. And this is very much you and your leadership team and what you're saying about your school in order to identify your actions. So you will see those 7 areas there. Within each of those areas is a set of statements. So you'll read the statement, you'll make a decision for yourself around where you think you are as a school on those. You will then be able to assign actions if you want to. Again, you don't want to assign an action for all 70 odd statements there are, because you're never going to complete that. But you'll want to prioritize, you'll assign actions, and then we will give you feedback based on those actions and what you're saying, and also share with you articles, resources and things that might help you with that action in developing yourself. So you will have a chance to kind of go on and have a look at that and explore it all over the course of the coming weeks. But your logins should be live from today. And at that point, I'm going to pause. If there are any questions around that, Meredith, I don't know if you could possibly just keep an eye on the chat and just prompt myself or Sarah if any questions come up. But at this point, I am going to pause and hand over to Sarah. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself and your fantastic expertise and experience, Sarah, to the group and take us through the rest of the morning.
Hello, good morning. I'm just working out now how to share the screen effectively. If you can give me a shout if it's working. Am I on?
Yep.
Yes, you've got the slide, you haven't got the presenter screen. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Fab. Sometimes I do it and I get the presenter screen on the wrong screen. The joys of having multi-screen, isn't it? Very exciting. Hello folks, it's really nice to meet you all. I'm very excited for this launch event. This is the second time that I've launched this with Whole Ed, and it's great to have Amy involved as well. This is Amy's first sorry, I'm just having trouble here with some of the screen. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to crack on. I'm hoping that you can see me okay. If you have any questions at all during this session, please do pop them in the chat, but I'm more than happy for you to just shout out and we'll get a conversation going, because you can guarantee somebody will have a similar question. Oh, there you are. That's my experience anyway. There's always somebody who wants to know the same kind of thing. So just give us a shout. I know somebody's already asked, will the slides be shared? And I'm assuming that that is going to happen. Amy, yep. Brilliant. Okay, so my name's Sarah, Sarah Quinn. I might have delivered training to you at some point. I might have actually been into 1 or 2 of your schools. It's really nice to meet you. I'm from an early years and primary background. I've worked for a number of different consultancy companies. I worked for Ofsted for a time, which was very interesting. Everybody thinks it's a very slick machine, don't they? It's a little bit chaotic, I have to say. You think school is chaotic, try working for Ofsted. And I now run my own consultancy, and I'm delighted to be working with Whole Ed on this early years program. This program is so incredibly effective. I've recommended it to so many different schools and MATs and local authorities, and we see really dramatic improvement because it helps you to get to the nitty-gritty. It helps you really get underneath what the minute aspects might be that are preventing you from driving that good level of development and enabling children to be ready to be productive, happy human beings in the future. One of the books that I really like at the moment is The Atomic Habits. I don't know whether anybody's read it. And anything to do with marginal gains. I think sometimes we look at these big areas, don't we? And we think, oh my goodness, how are we going to improve that? So for example, boys writing, how are we going to improve boys writing? We look at that as a huge area that needs improvement. And actually what we need to be doing is unpicking the minutiae that sits within that and identifying those tiny little aspects that will lead to improvement for the majority of the children. And then as those areas come together, we see a more dramatic improvement overall. I feel like we're in an interesting situation in education at the moment. And I'm sure this slide will resonate with the majority of you, especially if you've worked in early years for quite a long time. Children are definitely changing. Starting points of children are really, really different now. I always used to say, probably about 8 years ago, I used to say, oh, we're seeing a steady decline in the starting points for our children, and they're actually coming in with different strengths. They're coming in with different barriers. They're coming in with different gaps. But I think that context of children has changed dramatically in the last 5 years in particular. And I think we really need to address those areas and shift some of our practice to enable our children to thrive, as Sarah's already said this morning. It's about what do our children need to thrive, and that's the other thing, you know, that I'm absolutely thrilled with whole education and with yourselves as well, that you are putting early years right up there as the priority that it should be. You know, I'm a firm believer that we should have the strongest members of staff in early years. We should have the best level of funding going into early years. So there you go, head teachers. You can mull on that one. We need the best resources going into early years. We need bespoke training for early years for you and for the rest of your team. This is the start of your children's educational journey. And as I'll say a number of times today, it is not the independent republic of early years. This is the launch pad. And this is going to take our children into the next phase of their education. And hopefully, and I know this sounds really bad, and you probably won't listen to me after this, but I always say, what do we want for our children? Yes, we want them to be happy. We want them to be really productive citizens. We want them to be taxpayers. We want contribution, don't we, to our societies? That's what we're looking for, isn't it? We want intrinsically motivated human beings who really care about each other and about the world around them. So that's what, you know, I don't think that's a big ask, do you? Do you think we'll get them there? Yes, of course we'll get them there. So children are changing. One of the best things I feel that the DFE have brought out recently, or not recently, within some of their documentation, is the 7 key features of effective practice. Has everybody seen those within Development Matters? Give me a nod or a thumbs up if you've seen the 7 key features of effective practice. At the moment, I'm working, yay, Sarah's got a thumb up there, yay! At the moment, I'm working with lots of schools and we're looking at, thank you, Nasheen, that's brilliant, thank you for the thumb. We're looking at those 7 key features of effective practice and drafting policy around those 7 key features. And it's what's really interesting to me, when you look at the overall headings of the 7 key features, they look really straightforward. So we've got the best for every child. Well, yeah, we do want the best for every child. We've got high quality care, curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, executive functioning and self-regulation, which I'm going to keep banging on about because this is my big push at the moment, and then parents. Actually, when you go into those areas and unpick them, they're not as straightforward as you think. So you have a look at some of those bullet points that the DFE have produced. The first one, best for every child, is not about the best for every child. It's actually about your disadvantaged children. It's about your SEND children, early identification. It's about closing that gap or narrowing the gap, giving them the best possible opportunity to thrive in your settings. And it's about those children as well that have experienced some kind of trauma in their life. So have a look at some of those statements under the 7 key features, because they really help you to focus some of the work that you're doing. Under curriculum, we have bullet points like, the curriculum is the top level list of things that we want our children to know by the time they leave early years. But then if you go to the bottom point, it says that children should not learn lots of things in a superficial way. They should actually learn the key things in a very deep way. And again, this is something I'm seeing when we're looking at schools that are struggling to improve that good level of development. I'm actually seeing too much content in the curriculum. So we need to be paring the curriculum back so that we're teaching children the things that they actually need to thrive. That's what it's about, isn't it? And sometimes, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, sometimes the stuff that's coming in to the early years curriculum is actually coming in from Key Stage 1. So it's being sort of pushed down into early years. So I think there is this misconception that to improve outcomes for children, we need to teach them the Key Stage 1 curriculum as quickly as possible. And we know that that is not the case, don't we? So when you get a minute at the weekend, when you when you're just getting in bed on Saturday night, 9 o'clock, when you have that 10-minute slot, have a look at the 7 key features of effective practice. It's really good. Put your school inspection handbook down, because I know that's what you read to help you sleep. And read the 7 key features of effective practice. It's really, really good. Children are changing, and this is why we need this idea of fluff-free working. It's not about adding to your workload. It is about paring things back to the absolute essentials to ensure that our children get exactly what they need. So I always say, if we add something to your workload, we also need to look at what we can take away. And Amy made the point that, when we look at action planning, we have a billion priorities, don't we? Or we think we have a billion priorities. We cannot possibly be effective if we have a billion priorities. So we're going to pare those priorities right back so that we're focusing on the things that are going to have the maximum impact on children's outcomes. And that's what it's all about. What's going to have the maximum impact on children's outcomes. And like I said before, have a look at Atomic Habits. It's a really great, I was going to say a little book. It's not a little book. But you can't, does anybody use the app Blinkist? Blinkist, Blinkist. It's a really great app, and it summarizes key points from some of these like management style books and educational books that people are all reading. So you actually get the key messages without reading the whole thing. There you go. There's a little tip for you. It makes you look like you read a lot as well. In your unpicking of what's happening in your early years, I would urge you to have this in mind: fluff-free working, fewer things in greater depth, focusing on the things that are actually going to have an impact on children's outcomes. And there are certain things that we see regularly. I know this is old data, but it's still very relevant. There are certain things that we see regularly when we get our profile data back, and there are certain things that you see regularly when you get your internal assessment information back as well. So there are certain patterns that we tend to see year on year. We see not enough improvement for our disadvantaged children. We tend to see gaps for children in writing, for example, and it's not a shock, I have to say, but thinking about something like Atomic Habits and thinking about marginal gains, where we've looked in schools at the writing gap and we've prioritized things like writing and looked at writing in a very holistic way. We've actually built programs where children can become writers, using all the 7 areas of learning within the EYFS, and focusing on the things that actually have a big impact for children. Some of the things that really bother me at the moment are self-regulation. That's an area that really bothers me at the moment. When I'm going into schools, I'm seeing children that are really struggling with self-regulation. Is that something that you're seeing at the moment? Yeah. And I think sometimes it's a developmental issue rather than an SEND issue or a behavioural issue. And I think sometimes it's being flagged up very quickly, isn't it? As being, you know, oh, this behaviour is preventing this children and all the other children from being able to learn. And quite often we need to go back to basics. So let's think about child development. What do we know about cognitive development? What do we know about how children learn to learn and actually building a learner? And therefore, what do we need to put in place to support the children to be able to regulate? And it is really, really tough, but that is for me a priority area, and that sits alongside speaking and comprehension as well. We need children to be able to express themselves. You know, one of the first things that I would teach children in school is to say, stop, I don't like that, so they can prevent unwanted behaviour from other children or from adults. And we need to just keep coming back to this area, don't we? We need to try and help our children to reduce that frustration, reduce that overwhelm, and give them the tools necessary to actually access the education that we're putting in front of them. So I don't know what your very useful, if you're in reception, your very useful reception baseline assessment information is telling you at the moment, but I suspect some of this is coming out. And for those of you in nursery, I'm tending to see now in nursery a lot of our schematic play being played out for our nursery children for a lot longer than we might expect in the past. So, you know, there are some quite interesting contextual anomalies, if you like, within early years at the moment. But it's about knowing, isn't it? It's about knowing your data, knowing what the key aspects are for your children, and stripping out the things that are not actually going to make a difference. So you need to know what your data is telling you. Do we have that self-regulation issue? Do we have boy-girl gaps? If we do, are we engaging children well enough to access learning that we're putting in front of them? Do we have disadvantage gaps? Are we taking account of the barriers that children might have that prevent them from accessing early education and development? Do we have things like fine motor issues? You know, do we have an effective physical development program in place that enables the children to control the tools that we put in front of them? So it's really unpicking what that information is telling you. Now, when it comes to the self-evaluation tool that you're going to be using, these are the headings that you're going to be looking at. So you'll be looking at intent, which is your intention. What are you actually going to deliver to the children? So what is your top level priority for all of your children? What is in your curriculum? And what is your intention for all of those children? So that includes the context of your children, your rationale, how you are approaching learning, and what you're actually going to be delivering. When we come to implementation, we're looking at how you're going to do that. So we've got the what and the how there, haven't we? So how are you actually going to deliver that learning to the children? And are we delivering learning in an engaging way that enables all children to access what we're putting in front of them? So again, that's a really interesting area to unpick. And just as Amy said, under these headings, you will have a number of statements. And in the second part of this morning, I'm just going to give you some examples of those statements, and you can start to evaluate where you might sit in relation to some of those statements. And then, of course, we've got impact. So what impact are you having? What impact does your intent have on children's outcomes? What impact does your implementation have on children's outcomes? Now, when I'm looking at these three words, I tend to say to schools, we should really have a curriculum that enables the majority of our children to keep pace with what's being delivered. So we should, and you're going to hate me for this, but we should be able to keep around 70% of our children on track with what's being delivered. And that's because our curriculum is written for the children in front of us, taking into account their barriers, their strengths, their gaps, and looking at the key things that they need to get them to the end point. So for some of you, that trajectory might be quite steep for some of your children because their starting points might be quite low. And for some of you, the trajectory might be quite shallow. But really, if the curriculum is written well enough and it's delivered well enough, we should see impact. We should see the impact. And honestly, I'm telling you, this really works. This unpicking what that trajectory looks like in your 7 areas of learning, thinking about what they actually need to be successful by the end of early years, enabling them to thrive, enabling them to engage, getting that intrinsic motivation by really unpicking what you are delivering, can really support you to get your children to that end point. And then we're looking at working with families and communities. Obviously, parents are the first and most enduring educator of their child, and that partnership is really key to unpicking the context of the children and to supporting parents to engage with education and therefore their children to engage with education. And also, how are we making use of the community around us to support children's learning journey as well? We've then got effective use of adults. Now, this is a biggie again for me. There's, you know, do our adults have enough knowledge to deliver well? So do they know 3 things? Do they know the child? And to know the child, you have to play with them and talk to them. Do they know the child? Do they know child development? So do they understand that children at certain points in their development will say no, will have a little tantrum, you know, will have a meltdown? And can they deal with those situations in a developmentally appropriate way? And do they know your curriculum? So do they know what you're expecting the children to be learning? Do they know what the children should be doing next? Can they identify gaps? Can they identify misconceptions? And can they address some of those things as well? So it is a biggie because we're asking a lot of our adults in early years. And this is why we need the best members of staff in early years, because we expect an awful lot from them. I don't know if anybody's using the Education Endowment Foundation's Shrek approach. Anybody? No? Yay! Sarah's there again! Yay, Sarah! Shrek is brilliant. It's so simple. If you Google Education Endowment Foundation Shrek, and it's Shrek with a C, so SHREC, and it stands for share attention, respond, extend, converse. So it's a really straightforward program. But what I would urge you to do is look at the videos, because in the videos people are slowing down their communication with the children to ensure that children are understanding and ensuring that they're picking up the vocabulary and things like that. So just a little tip there, it is a really good program. Then we've got transition into early years, transition out of early years. Is it effective enough that children have no break in their education? As I said, it's not the independent republic of early years. We should not be in this sort of bubble, and they finished their early years education and now they're going into national curriculum. It should be a smooth process. We should see children's educational journey as one event that enables them to thrive and become the best person. SHREC is the Education Endowment Foundation, so it's the EEF. If you just Google EEF SHREC, you'll get the blog and the links to the videos. And then we've got leadership and management. So all of this depends on really strong leadership and management, and not just management and leadership and management of the early years, but leadership and management of the school, doesn't it? Oh, thank you, Amy. There's a link now on the chat for anybody that wants to have a look at SHREC. And I think it's really important that senior leaders in the school understand that it is more actually than outcome. So it is more than the impact of what's happening in early years. It's more than the percentage, isn't it? And as we know, the DFE are very clear that the good level of development percentage is not an accountability measure. It is about all of those things coming together. So our intent, you know, what do we actually want for the children? What is the vision for our children? How does this align with school vision and values? How are we feeding the school vision and values into the approach that we are delivering in early years? What's happening for disadvantaged children? What's happening for those with SEND? Do we quickly identify the strengths, the gaps, the barriers for our children and address those things? And self-regulation, is that high profile in school? It's a key feature of effective practice. It's number 6 on that list. It is an early learning goal in itself. You know, and anybody that knows anything about self-regulation, you know that we do not become regulated people until we're in our 20s. We do not have impulse and emotional control by the age of 5. You know, it takes an awful long time, and actually some of the most recent research is suggesting that actually people are moving into their 30s without emotional and impulse control, without organizational skills, without good working memory, without the ability to plan and prioritize, without all of those features that enable us to think flexibly and cope with change. So those of you that are on the call now and you're in your 20s, we know that you're going to be impulsive and, you know, you're going to have an emotional breakdown, and that's absolutely fine. In fact, everybody does at some point, don't they? So actually, we need to look at some of these goals in the context of a 5-year-old. What does it actually mean for a young child to be self-regulated? And then we've got implementation, which is all about your adult knowledge, your curriculum, child development, play, which I'm going to talk about in the second part. The importance of play. Play is not just having a nice time. Play actually enables more plasticity in the brain. It enables creative and critical thinking. So play is an absolute essential staple in an early years classroom. The learning environment, do we enable children to practice and apply what they've been taught using the environment? Are we providing adaptations that enable our children to access learning? And do we have regard to the characteristics of effective learning? So we have engaged and motivated learners who are creative and critical thinkers. And then impact. So what's the outcome? What evidence do we have of our impact? What evidence is needed? What assessment are you using? And what does best fit mean? So what is best fit? It's the only place in education, isn't it, that we use this term best fit. So it's really important that we understand what that means. And you will know, if you've been to moderation events or you've led moderation events, you'll know that the interpretation of the goal is broad, isn't it? You know, you can have somebody who insists that their children are writing in paragraphs with perfect punctuation and cursive writing, compared to a child who scribbles a note down on a post-it note, and they will both say, yes, that child has reached the goal. So it's knowing what that standard is going to look like for you as well. It's a whole school approach. It's not the People's Independent Republic of Early Years. It is a whole school approach. When I was in early years, I always insisted on introducing the new cohort to the whole school. So we'd have a staff meeting where I talked through all the children that had started in nursery and where they were, any new joiners in reception, and we look at you know, the context of those children, and keep updating everybody as the year progressed. So transition becomes less of a big issue. It's actually just part of everyday practice, because everybody knows everything about the children and they know where the children are up to. It has to be a joined up approach. We need leaders to be involved. It must be a collaborative process. I don't know any of you that are in primary schools at the moment or infant schools. You may be having conversations with subject leaders about what their subject might look like in early years. And that's really important. You know, they need to understand what their subject looks like in early years. I did have a science leader once during an inspection who told me that they don't do science in early years. And I was very kind, and I said, "Ooh, maybe you need to just go away for a second and think about that, and then I'll ask you the question again in a minute." You know, the majority of an early years morning is spent doing science, isn't it? Or an early years day is spent doing science. So it is a whole school approach, and this online self-evaluation that you are going to do must be seen as a whole school approach. You need to be working with senior leaders in school. It's not just for the early years leader to sit and work through the evaluation tool. You must do this together. It is a whole school unpicking of everything that is happening for the children at the start of their educational journey. So it's really important that we have that collaborative approach, and that can be done in a number of different ways. You can sit together and work through it. You can complete it separately and join your ideas together. You know, early years leaders can complete it with their team and then talk through it with head teachers, but it must be a collaborative approach. We'll then get some lovely information from your evaluation, and I would urge you to be brutally honest, because that's the only way we're going to see improvement. You will get information in a variety of different ways, including donuts. So I had to put a picture of a donut on there. And you will then be able to prioritize your next steps. So that information will be presented to you, and you can then look at which areas are coming out as weaker, which areas might have a more immediate impact on children's outcomes. Quite often, these are the hardest areas to tackle. And sometimes we can fall into that trap of addressing very practical areas quickly, rather than focusing on the weaknesses that are going to make the biggest difference in the long run. So you need to have that in mind as well. You know, if the weakness lies in the implementation of the curriculum, if it's something to do with the teaching, that is actually going to take more time, isn't it, to fix. And, you know, whilst it might be great to spend a fortune on lots of early excellence furniture, that will not fix the weaknesses in teaching. So quite often that can be the area that needs a lot of unpicking and a lot of work. But this is your opportunity to be brutally honest, to unpick everything and find those areas. You're going to have so much support through the year to help you to tackle some of those weaker areas. Please, please take advantage of the situation. Take advantage of your coach, take advantage of the CPD. Ask the questions, the difficult questions. You know, if you've got members of staff, which I know some of you do have quite difficult members of staff sometimes in early years, don't you? You might have members of staff who say, well, we've always done it this way and they've done it that way for 15 years. And you're saying, well, actually, you know, children are very different now, so we might need to do it a different way. Sometimes it can be very hard to shift their practice, but you've got a team behind you now. You're not tackling it on your own. Everybody's behind you, and we all want to support you to improve. You're going to produce your action plan from the self-evaluation tool. And you'll do that as well online. So after the event, you know, log on, have a little look through what all of those things look like. And there'll be an event called Planning for Impactful Change that will take you through the process of producing your action plan. And it's so great with whole education because you get feedback as well on your action planning, and you'll get suggested further CPD. So, you know, it could be a case of you've identified a particular area for improvement, and somebody reviewing your action plan might say, have a look at this article, this might actually help you, watch this video, this could really support you. You will also get feedback on, you know, the actions that you might be taking and whether they are the actions that are actually going to have the most impact across the year. So do take advantage. I know I keep saying it, but do take advantage of the whole situation, all the team around you. Everybody just wants the best for the children, but also for you. This, I find, is a program of empowerment for early years leaders. We want you to feel brilliant about leading early years, because it can be a really tough job, can't it, sometimes. So, you know, please do take advantage of all of that. So we're going to have some coaching as well, which I know Amy has mentioned. And again, please do be very honest with your coach. Be really open about what you're finding tricky. If it is elements of managing the team, if it's elements of improving teaching, you know, be very open and honest, because they are there to help and support you. And of course, you will have this whole program of training around you. And that's going to help you to overcome some of the obstacles that you might have in your way. You know, the team that are around you are the ones that are going to have the time to find the articles, to read the books, to summarize the information for you, to suggest further training. So you are not working completely alone to try and find the right tool to improve some of your identified areas. Okay. So that's it really in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Particularly head teachers who are going to leave us at this point. I know it's gone a little bit longer than we originally said, but if you've got any questions, now's the time. Put it on the chat, give us a wave, shout out.
I was just going to add there, Sarah, obviously head teachers are welcome to stay through, but
yes,
we know
absolutely. Yeah.
Lots and lots to do, and very, very busy role. So you're very, very welcome, but we will be stopping for a break in a moment, and head teachers, you are welcome to leave us at that point. I was just going to share actually a little bit, Sarah. It reminded me when you were talking there and describing kind of the importance of those really early stages of setting children up for their learning, and how important it is, you know, not just kind of the play elements, like motor skills development, being able to regulate the impact of kind of potential gaps in sensory development before they arrive with us, and what those can potentially do if we don't identify them really, really early. And I was just going to reflect and share. I work with a charity on a project in a country that is sadly got some of the worst statistics in the world. And in terms of the global sustainability goals, has made the least progress since those began. And that's Djibouti. And we built a school in Djibouti. It's the first early years school in Djibouti. And the first time I went out to actually see the children, it really was stark what happens when children do not have access to that early development, and they come into school with no ability to manipulate their hands, to understand any kind of regulation. They've not had play because they don't have anything to play with, and the impact of that. And then it's not surprising when you see that that's one of the countries with lowest death rates in the world, worse malnutrition, you know, worse poverty indexes, not able to get themselves out of it because their ability to learn, because they're missing all those things right at the beginning, was really stark. And so I'm going back out in a month. We go out every year, so trying to just really focus on that early development, all the stuff you're talking about, but kind of seeing it at that extreme when it just does not exist it's really powerful. So one of the other things I was just going to say as well, one of the beauties of the program, and you were saying, Sarah, about the donuts and the information it gives you in terms of the data, what it also enables people to do is to look at that and say, well, actually, across the borough, we are all saying that we feel we don't have confidence in this particular area. So to really focus on development programs that Sarah and Helen and people will lead, it gives some really useful information as well to help everybody together, because obviously working together on that is crucial to help everyone move forward. So lots of positives, but I just thought I'd share that with you, my experience of kind of what it's like when none of this exists.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I bet it's brilliant, actually, isn't it? Keep going back and having a look and
You'll have
see.
to come one year, Sarah.
Yeah, amazing.
So
Right,
yes,
should we have a
Yep.
little break now?
I'm going to pop my screen up, Sarah, just so that you pop this up there. I guess we'll come back in about 20 minutes if everyone's okay with that. A quick 20-minute break, grab a cup of coffee, and we will return at 10:10 if everyone's okay with that. Switch back.
That's great. Hello, welcome back, everybody. Have you mulled over any questions during your break? Is there anything sort of popped into your head that you think you might want to ask at this point? No, everybody feeling okay? Right, so we're going to have a look now at some areas that you might want to consider as an early years leader. So we're going to go through some key areas of practice and also some leadership aspects. And we're also going to look at some of the questions that will come up on the self-evaluation tool, and just consider what good self-evaluation entails. So I hope that's okay. As I said before, if you want to ask any questions, you can pop them in the chat. You can unmute and give me a shout. You can give us a wave. It's entirely up to you. We are going to use breakout rooms in the second session. But we're also going to open up to just general discussion, because there's not loads of you, and some of you will know each other, so it would be useful, I think, if we can get some conversations going. Some of you will have very similar areas that you want to focus on. So that's where we're at the moment. So we're going to have a think about play. And the reason I want to start this second session by really pushing play, and the reason I mentioned it in the first session, is because I'm a little bit concerned that play is being pushed out of early years a little bit at the moment. And as I said, I think some of it is because there is this misconception that if we do more formal things more early, then we'll see better outcomes. And we know that that is not the case. So there's a really great piece of research that I like to use called The Ambiguity of Play. And what it actually does is it's sort of a meta-analysis of play research. And it pulls together lots of different pieces of research and looks at the impact of play on the brain. And there are some really key points in that research. So one of the points that really resonates with me is that if we stop our children from playing before the age of 8 and ideally 10, we actively reduce the potential capacity of that brain for future learning. So we put a halt to the plasticity, the malleability of children's brains. Another area to think about when we're looking at play is the link to self-regulation and the prefrontal cortex. So all of our executive functioning sits in the prefrontal cortex. Children are very good at knowing stuff. They've got knowledge. You know, you can think about those children now that can tell you anything about a dinosaur, and they'll go on for hours about a dinosaur, you know, and they know everything. But what they're not great at doing is using the information unless they're interested in it. So there are certain things that we can do to stimulate our children to use the information by activating that doing part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And that spells out pinch. And I'm going to tell you what the areas are, because it's not pinch. Don't pinch your children. That doesn't go down well. The first area is play. So you can see play is right up there. If we stimulate happiness, if we stimulate serotonin and dopamine, we get more use of executive functioning from our children. So there's your P. The next one is interest. So you can see those two things are high priority in early years. Using play and children's interests, again, stimulates serotonin, stimulates dopamine. We get more doing. And we know if we do something to do with children's interests, we get more engagement and more motivation. We then get novelty. So novelty, again, that stimulates dopamine and serotonin, happy hormones and satisfaction hormones. And novelty is great, isn't it? You know, you put a glitter pen in the writing area and everybody wants to be a writer that day. Anything that's a little bit unusual just gets them going, doesn't it? So there's your N. Then we get to C, which is competition, and we're stimulating adrenaline. So if we stimulate adrenaline, that can work for a lot of children, not all children. The first three tend to work for all children. When we get to competition, it doesn't always work for all children. Sometimes it can actively close the brain down. It can cause a little bit of dysfunction. They don't like it, it's too stressful. So you've got to know your children really well. So we've got competition, and the final one is hurry. So giving them time limits. Again, we're stimulating adrenaline, but sometimes, you know, certain children don't like that and they won't respond to it. It's actually, the final one is actually fear, but we don't use fear with our youngest children. We use hurry. You know, we give them time limits. It's a little bit like, you know, your tidy up song. When you have your tidy up song on, it stimulates a little bit of adrenaline for some children. Some children really like it and it gets them really involved. We have to watch though really carefully, because for some children it can be quite stressful and stimulate cortisol instead. So we just have to be careful with those final two. But the first three, absolutely brilliant. Play, interest, novelty, they are the things that I would always go to when we've got reluctant learners. So, you know, your reluctant learners, I'm going to say it, the construction gang, you know, those boys that are always in the construction. They're the ones that need play, interest and novelty. They're the ones that struggle with things like flexible thinking. So you try and pull them out of construction and get them to do the writing. You know, you hear teachers, don't you, say, come on, Billy, you have to come and do your writing now. And poor Billy drags his body across the classroom and sits on a chair, and you can see his brain shut down. He can't cope, he's got no ability to think flexibly, and he cannot initiate a task, and his whole brain just shuts down. So we have to find a way of tricking him into doing it by using play, interest and novelty. And let's face it, early years is all about tricking children into doing what we want them to do, isn't it? They think they're having a great old time. This is why they go home and parents say, what did you do today? And they say, oh, we just played. That's brilliant. I want them to say that, because I've tricked that child into learning, because they just think they've had a lovely day and just played all day. But we know that we're making connections in the brain. We know that we are building those characteristics of effective learning. We're engaging, we're motivating, we're building creative and critical thinkers. We're expanding that ability for our children to become problem solvers. And that's what we want. You know, somebody in this country has the next government in their early years, or a future government in their early years. We need critical thinking, we need problem solvers, we need creative people. So let's push play. Play is absolutely essential for our youngest children. Anybody agree with me there? Oh, I'm getting a few nods. Oh, that's good. Yay! I'm quite pleased about that. Does anybody not agree? Does anybody not play with the children? Oh, that's good as well, isn't it? That's very reassuring. I did go into a nursery classroom not that long ago, actually. And it was one of those schools where they thought, you know, that if they make things formal more quickly, then children will learn quicker. And I went into the nursery classroom, and they'd put lots of tables in there, so all the children could sit down, and they'd given them handwriting books, you know, with the blue and red lines, and pencils. And the teacher was standing at the front trying to deliver a cursive writing lesson, because the English leader had told her that would be a really good thing to do. And she eventually just cried, because the children were rolling around on the floor and, you know, colouring in the lines and poking each other. And it was great. It was great fun. I thought it was hilarious. But poor thing, you know, we had to say, we need to speak to your English leader, really, because we, you know, they've had no program of physical development. Let's get some dough out and do some dough instead. But sometimes it's that lack of understanding, isn't it? You know, and I'm sure you've had colleagues who've said things to you like, well, all you do is play. All you do is play in the sand, you know, and actually you sometimes can get a little bit wound up with that, can't you? But you have to reassure yourself that that is your job. It's absolutely essential. And then we get the flip side, where we get TAs who might come in and do some covering in early years, and they'll walk through the door and say, what do you want me to do? And you say, just play. And the colour drains from their face, and they're like, what do you mean, just play? Give me a job, give me a task. No, just go and play with the children. And some people find it very hard to do that, don't they? So you might have, you know, members of staff in early years who really struggle to get into play and really struggle to extend play. And that can be quite hard to address as well. So, you know, when we're talking about teaching and improving teaching, that all sits within this idea, doesn't it, of knowing how a child's brain develops, knowing the importance of play, and knowing how we as adults can support that whole process. So I just thought, you know, I would bang on a little bit about play, because it's so incredibly important. Now I want you to think about why you are a leader. Why did you become an early years leader? Okay. And we're going to go into breakout rooms. You can have a little look at some of those things around the circle there. So is it recognition? Is it stimulating work? Is it because you've had good examples? You know, why is it that you lead? We're going to put you into breakout rooms. I want you to just have a few minutes talking about why you became a leader. And we'll get some great answers. I'm hoping some people will come back and just tell us why they became leaders. That would be fantastic. Is that okay, Amy, if we just use a breakout room there?
Yeah, Meredith, are you okay with that one? Meredith.
Hello, folks. Okay, I'm dying to hear why you are leading. So why did you become an early years leader? Who's got something to share with us? Come on.
I can share what my group said, if that's helpful.
Yeah,
So
that would be super if you don't mind.
I wrote down some bullet points. So sort of champion early years. So to be that sort of voice in their school as the expert.
Yeah.
Sort of really, obviously, we're all here to make a difference, but particularly for those little people in our schools. Many of them became leaders so they could work with their team sort of more effectively and build the sort of skill set, understanding and expertise of their team.
Yeah.
But shall I keep going? Or?
Yeah, that sounds great. Anybody want to add anything? Come on, be brave. Why are you leading? Why have you become a leader?
Hi. I think for me, I was just saying to my breakout room, I spent sort of all my career in Key Stage 2, from years 3 to 6, and just seeing how the children, you know, how the gaps widen. Some of the children just become more and more lost. So for me, it was a big change moving to reception, but I really wanted to sort of, you know, with support, get my hands on early years, if you like, and sort of, you know, I could see that the difference it would make if we get it right in early years, and the impact that would then have as the children move through the school.
Claire, you are so right. I absolutely love that answer. Get your hands on early years. I love that.
With the support of Sarah Cottle, may I add.
I love that. But it's true though, isn't it? And you know, all of the gaps, all of the barriers, all of the things that we're struggling with can be addressed. Honestly, I promise things can be addressed and things can get better. Which is why you've got to really take advantage of this program. It's really going to help you. Anybody else want to share why they became a leader?
Well, in our breakout room, a lot of us were saying that we sort of accidentally fell into leadership a little bit. But actually, thinking about it, it's quite nice because a lot of schools in Windsor and Maidenhead are quite small. So if you've only got a 1-form entry, well, then you are the expert. So yeah, a lot of us have just sort of been thrust into this position, but it's quite nice because now we do feel like we are experts.
Yeah. Well, Chelsea, you again, you're so right. That was me. I fell into it because nobody else would do it, and it's just like, well, you know a bit about it, so you can do it. You know, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. As was, you know, the head teacher saying to me one year, you're moving from year 6 into nursery, and you know, you sort of go home and cry and think, what? How is that going to work? And then it's the best thing that ever happened to you. Has anybody done that? Well, Claire, you've done that, haven't you? You've moved from Key Stage 2 into early years. And it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a completely new job. But I think as well, it's just so inspiring because it does feel like a new job. So yeah, best move I made, I think.
Yeah. And I love that attitude. Get your hands on early years because you know you can make a difference. Is everybody in that mindset at the moment? You know that you can make a difference. Yeah. Is anybody feeling a bit despondent? I mean, you know, I'm trusting that we're in a very safe space here. If anybody's feeling a bit despondent and a bit overwhelmed, you can share this with your colleagues. It's perfectly valid space for you to say those things. Rachel, you're feeling a bit.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to early years. I started last year was my first year teaching. And like Chelsea said, I was in her breakout room. We're a 1-form entry school, so it was you're the teacher, you're the lead. And last year was really challenging. This year has its challenges as well. But actually, I saw at the end of last year, I saw something on social media, and it was like early years teachers, it's like witchcraft. You're witches. Like children come to you in nursery or reception not being able to write or read or count, and then one day they're just writing whole stories. And I think I'd seen a video on Instagram or something, and it was a parent, a mum, and she was like, I don't know what those people at school are doing to my child. Like, she can just do things now. And that when I do have those moments of, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm so overwhelmed, this is way too much for me, I think about where they're going to get to.
Yeah.
And that kind of, that witchcraft thing, I was like, no, this is what we're doing is right, and we're making a difference.
Absolutely, Rachel, I love that. And that's always how I felt, that you see the most progress, I think, in early years, don't you? You know, you get these little bods in, and quite often they're very upset and they don't want to be there. You know, and you get them to a point by the end of the year that they can follow routines and they can communicate with each other and they can play and they remember everybody's name. And you know, that they can, and the read, write and count thing is kind of secondary, isn't it? Because they become like productive people who, you know, have something to contribute to the day, and I just love it. I just think that was such a fantastic share, Rachel. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. You're right, Amy. Golden. Anybody else want to add anything?
I think what you said at the beginning about how children are changing, I think that's really, really tricky for us at the moment, because, you know, that's one reason that we were talking about in our breakout room, why we wanted to do this, because we need that whole school support, because children are different now. You know, you cannot just here, look, from my experience, I cannot guarantee that the children are going to be on pink read, write, ink books by the time they get into year one, because there is so much else that we need to put into them. And I think this course is going to be really helpful in showing the whole school that, look, children have changed, children are changing, society is changing, and it's up to us to change how we work with them, exactly like you put it at the beginning, so that we can then ensure that they get there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Helen and I were talking while you were in breakout rooms about specifically teaching executive functioning and self-regulation. I mean, you know, I didn't do that when I was in school. We modelled it as adults, but now schools are specifically teaching emotional control, impulse control, because children are not getting those role models. They're not really understanding what that looks like. You know, there's a lot of our children who don't know what a happy, positive, productive relationship can look like. So we're modeling those things, aren't we? And we're specifically teaching them how to communicate with each other. Rachel?
Sorry, I don't mean to dominate, but it was just, you know, again, what Chelsea was saying about moving up into year one, reading the pink level books. Like, actually, I found here at my school, we do have that whole school approach. And actually, all of the team here are really aware of the fact that actually they might not all get to that point. And that's okay. There's things that we can do to support that.
Yeah.
I'm finding actually it's the families, it's our parents and carers, that we sent our first reading books home last week, and it was a non-worded book because we haven't taught enough sounds yet. And already I've had messages and notes in their reading diary saying they can already read simple words. Like, why are you not challenging them? And I said, this is the first time we've sent a book home. I haven't had them for long enough to be able to do those assessments. Like, I find it's the family engagement that is tricky, and they're like, well, why can't they do this and this and this? And I practice the 11 times table with them, but they don't know what they're doing though, do they? They can tell you it by rote because you've just kind of drilled it into them,
but it's meaningless.
They don't understand it. And that's what I find tricky, is more the parent engagement, actually.
So that's quite a barrier for you then, isn't it? And your children, you know, when we're talking about those barriers, quite often it is parents, and quite often it can be not enough engagement or too much engagement, which is really interesting. So it's an interesting situation to be in. Helen?
It's just really interesting in the school readiness work that we're doing, which is actually being led by secondary and some primary schools. One of the things we're recognizing is that we need to do more explicit support with our families to help the families support the transition program.
Yeah.
Slightly different example, but so for example, a child goes home saying they've been bullied in the playground. Parent comes in very angry, but when we unpick it, it was just a fallout because one of them wanted the football and the other one. So it was working with our families about understanding the difference between quite natural conflict resolution between two children, and it's not bullying. So that focus on supporting our parents, I think, could be for some of your schools some area that you want to focus on to help them to understand, to work with parents to help them understand
And you know,
those transitions.
Parents don't know what they don't know. They've learned from their parents, haven't they? And, you know, we talk about dysregulation in our children. Well, children are dysregulated because quite often they're learning dysregulation from dysregulated adults. So I find parents come into school ready to have a fight. They're ready to have an argument, aren't they? And actually, it's because it's the way that they deal with situations. So it's sort of redirecting, isn't it? Like we would with the children, we're redirecting. We're sort of you know, I always say kill them with kindness and, you know, make them see there's another way of communicating and that we can resolve these issues. So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? The whole thing is so interesting. But you as leaders, you know, these are the things that you need to be considering when you're putting your evaluation together. You've got to think about those barriers. What are the barriers that are preventing the children from you know, being ready to move into Key Stage 1 or being productive people, or, you know, however you want to put it. Just have a look at this for me. So great leaders. This is from a nice bit of leadership research, and I think it's so relevant to schools. So great leaders have this sense of personal responsibility, a lively intellectual curiosity. You can't do this job without an intellectual curiosity, can you? There's always something to look at. There's always some research coming out. There's always something new, you know, coming into education. Optimism. Are we all very optimistic all the time for all of our children? You have to be, don't you? And especially when you are providing that really positive emotional environment for your children. Our children really soak up every emotion around them, don't they? So we have to be the model of optimism. And actually, for staff, you have to be the model of optimism, don't you? You know, you've got to keep them going, you know, and keep that that level of energy up and that positivity, a genuine interest in what other people think, and why they think that way, and that I think is quite tough when you're a new leader in particular. You know, you have a particular way that you want things to be done. Sometimes people interpret your vision in a different way, or they disagree with you, and you've got to be accepting and just understand that everybody's from a different context. Everyone has a different background. People's brains have been put together in lots of different ways, so we all have a different view of the world, don't we? And it is being, you know, accepting of that. The special responsibility for envisaging a future that's different from a straight line projection of the present. Trends are not destiny, and that's something to really embed in your mind. Trends are not destiny. We do not have to have the same outcomes every single year. We can change it, but sometimes we have to be brave. We've got to be brave. We've got to strip out the things that don't work, put the things in that do work, do more of the things that work, and be brave. Sometimes it's about standing on your soapbox, isn't it? And banging the drum for early years. You know, no, I'm not doing a handwriting lesson in nursery because the children want to roll around and eat each other's shoes. So we're not at the point where we can hold a pencil and write in cursive script. And you've got to be really brave and stand up. A hunch that most risks are there not to be avoided but to be taken. I always say to early years leaders, trust your gut, trust your instinct. If you think this is the right thing for my children, 9 times out of 10, it is the right thing for your children. So crack on and do it. And then this one, I absolutely love: risks. A mindset that crises are normal, tensions are promising, and complexity is fun. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to keep saying that crisis is the norm now, isn't it? You know, quite often head teachers, when I go in and do school improvement visits, will say to me, oh, it's just a crisis. Every day is a crisis. And I'll say, well, every day isn't a crisis, is it? Because that is your norm. That is your baseline. So it's not a crisis. That is what you're operating at. Anything that goes above that, we can call a crisis. But if we're there, that is the norm. That's where we're at. And you know, we cannot deal with we can't go into school every single day thinking that adrenaline and cortisol is going to get us through the day. That is really not going to be a good mindset. So we need to be really clear about this, that crises are normal. School does not operate smoothly on a daily basis, does it? Never. I went into a nursery once and the nursery teacher said it's an absolute nightmare when she phoned me up, and I went in, and I just looked around. There was a child sitting in the role play area smearing poop up the walls. There were 3 boys outside with their trousers down, weeing on the children on the bikes. And then a little girl ran into the room flapping a dead bird. And I just thought, yep, this is nursery. Where should we start? You know, it's that, isn't it? You know, and these are the days that you will have, and you just have to get on with it. It's just, yeah, okay, let's crack on. And then this one at the bottom, this piece of research actually identifies as the most impactful statement. So if you succumb to paranoia and self-pity, you will not be an effective leader. So you have to accept the fact that you will not please everybody all the time, and that people will talk about you. And that's just the way it is as a leader, isn't it? Sometimes you make decisions that are not popular. You have to stand shoulder to shoulder with senior leaders and deliver messages sometimes that you don't 100% believe in, but you have to do that. And I'm going to be a bit soppy here and say Maslow's hierarchy of need is for every human, not just for children in early years. And if we start to say that we don't agree with senior leadership, or you know, we're cross and angry and the school's not being run very well, then we make our staff team feel unsafe. And if our staff team feel unsafe, they cannot function properly. We lower their self-esteem, they feel unhappy, they're not going to see themselves as potentially really effective practitioners. So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of need, make sure not just your children but your staff, make sure they are well fed, well watered, well rested, they've had some fresh air and they slept well. Make sure they are safe and secure. Make sure they feel like they belong and you have a relationship with them, even if they're a bit weird and you don't really get on with them. You know, you've got to find something that enables you to have that relationship with them. And then we can raise their self-esteem, and then we can see them as having potential to be the best possible practitioner. But you have to accept that people are going to talk about you because you are leading them. And that's fine. Let them get it out of their system, and then move on. Anybody got anything to add or anything to comment on about any of those statements? It is a really interesting piece of research. Actually, I would recommend having a look at it. It's quite old, but it's really, really relevant for schools. So what do we do then when we come across a challenge? What are the challenges in early years leadership? Tell me what the challenges are. You've already said children are changing. We've got challenges from parents. What else have we got? What other challenges do we have as an early years leader? You can pop it in the chat or you can shout out.
I think perhaps I think you mentioned it earlier, subject leaders. So for example, you know, the writing lead or the reading lead, you know, don't quite have that understanding of reception. So that's sort of an important conversation to have, I think, across the school.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in terms of understanding child development, I think sometimes we have leaders who perhaps see these little bods as being little adults, and they have very high expectations of them, which is great. But actually, some of these little bods are not able to achieve what the expectation might be dictating. We've got time pressures on the chat there. Absolutely, there are some challenges around time pressure, increase of children with SEND and not enough support or resources to help them effectively. 100%, absolutely 100%. Is everybody experiencing that? Yeah, so we've got certain things happening now, haven't we, in early years. We've got issues around speech and language. Everybody got speech and language issues? Yeah. Have you all seen Mr. Tongue? Yeah, Sarah's nodding there. I love Mr. Tongue. If anybody wants Mr. Tongue, get in touch with me and I'll send it you. It's a PowerPoint that you work through with the children. It just gets them exercising their tongue, their mouths, 5 minutes every single day, and you'll see a huge improvement in articulation for children. It really helps them with the phonics. It's absolutely brilliant. Don't Google it on your school computer because your firewall might, you know, you might get an alarm. More EAL support needed. Yes, there are lots of children out there starting in school now with little to no English and very little support out there. So yeah, yes, I will share the Mr. Tongue presentation with you. Yes, it's for nursery and reception. Yeah, it is a speech therapy program. But it's really lovely. The children love it, and actually I get all the adults doing it as well, and they love it. Gets rid of your jowls. It's really good. Okie dokie. So how about leading the people that you are working with? So you're leading that team and you are there with them every single day. Is it can it be tricky when you're trying to give difficult messages or you're trying to change practice?
Taking on an influence question. I think it's quite tricky.
Sorry, go on.
I think it can be quite tricky, especially sort of changing mindsets of maybe have been there for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Like ever changing sort of.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I think it's when people have done it for a long time, you know, and they'll say, well, we've always done it this way. It's sort of drip feeding different ways of doing it, isn't it? You know, so you're keeping people on board, but accepting the fact as well that you're not going to please everybody and you are going to get people's backs up. But it's tricky because you're in there every day and you're trying to change things. It can be an incredibly challenging area of the school to lead. But you know, we're all behind you. Quite a few miles behind you I am, but I've still got your back. Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything? Any other challenges you want to share?
Sarah, I was going to say it's sometimes the role of that adult, and especially if they've moved into early years, the understanding of that additional adult, of their role within that classroom. Can be quite challenging for, you know, new to early years, or if you know, and I know heads, one of the things Helen Huntley and I talked about in our local area was that lots of our head teachers maybe have had a Key Stage 2 background from their sort of experience of teaching. So, and whilst they're incredibly supportive and understand the value of early years, it can be quite isolating then in that situation where those additional adults are key to those interactions with those children.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sarah. And I think particularly in a small school as well, if you've got leaders in a small school who really don't get early years and you're the only advocate for early years, that can be a real challenge, can't it?
I've had a little bit of an issue with, I guess you'd call it misinformation on social media, where a younger member of staff, speaking as someone in her 50s, said to me, oh, this is how the younger teachers are doing it these days, because she'd seen some things on Instagram. So I think the prevalence of easily accessible so-called early years practice and visual prompts without there's no real thinking or learning to this pretty activity that's on Instagram. That's been a little bit of a problem for me at times this year, or last year rather. Yeah. But I don't know if anyone else has got anything similar.
I can honestly really sympathize with that, because if I'm working with schools and we're looking at changing practice and we're looking at changing the environment, quite often I will go in and they've set up these lovely little tough trays with stuff that they've seen on Instagram. And my first question is, where does that link to your curriculum? So what skills, what knowledge are children practicing and applying in relation to the trajectory of your curriculum? And they'll say, well, we just saw it on Instagram. They're dead honest, but that's really nice, but it doesn't link with anything we're doing. It's not part of the curriculum. So it's that mindset, isn't it, that everything in that room links to the trajectory of your curriculum. And yes, you might see something that's really beautiful and engaging. You might see a method that you think, oh yeah, I'm going to try that, but it has to have something to do with your priority, doesn't it? It can't just be, oh yeah, we'll stick some stuff in a tough tray because it looks really beautiful. It doesn't look beautiful for long though, does it? As soon as they get the little paws on it, it's gone, isn't it? If I send Mr. Tong to you, Amy, is that all right? Can it be distributed? Yeah, lovely. Okie dokie. So let's have a think about this idea of moving forward. How are we going to move our practice on? And there is a really great model here. I don't know if anybody uses Leadership Matters, honk.org.uk. Anybody aware of that? All the Andy Book material. It's a great model that gets you thinking about all the elements that have to come together for you to lead change, or for you to lead effectively to improve elements within your setting. So we're thinking about the future. What is the future? What's that going to look like? I know a lot of schools have reevaluated the way they write their school improvement planning or performance management, and they're looking at this idea of the ideal. So if it was perfect, what would it look like? What is the absolute ideal? And this is what we need to have in mind. What does the future look like? What would great look like? And then we're going to think about the reality. So what is the reality? What's our starting point? And then how are we going to move these things to get to the absolute pinnacle of amazing practice? And the things we have to move are the people and the tasks. And we're bringing the people and the tasks together to get to that future point. So it's about bringing all of your people on board. And you can see there in one of those little segments, it says creating alignment. So we create alignment by including everybody in that whole process. We're pulling everybody into the process. And again, when I talk to you about writing policy around the 7 key features of effective practice, that's not something that I would do with an early years leader or with a head teacher. That's something I would do with an early years team. So what do we think great pedagogy looks like? And we'll come to an agreement. We're aligning our values, we're aligning our vision, and we're getting everybody on board. By doing that, we're engaging and we're building those sustainable relationships. Now, to deliver the future, we need to plan the tasks. So we've got to have all these tasks in mind, and we have to delegate, and we've got to have that really great timeline, so we know what success is going to look like. We know when we're on the way. We might be milestoning, so we know we're on the way if by December this has happened. If by March this has happened, we know that we're on the way to the absolute future ideal. So I want you to just think about that model when you're pulling your action plan together. Just think about how are we including everybody in the process? What does the ultimate success look like? And what tasks are going to actually get us from our reality to the ultimate success? Okay. And it needs to be that collaborative approach. It can't all be on your shoulders all the time, although I bet you feel like it is on your shoulders all the time. One of the things that I find at the moment is that people are quite good at the what. So they know what they're doing and they know how they're doing it. The action plan, somebody's asking, we're providing a template for the action plan. The action plan is electronically produced. So I will take you to the self-evaluation, and then when we do the impactful change, you'll be looking at producing that action plan in an electronic format. So don't worry about templates. So schools are really good at knowing the what. They know what they're doing and they know how they're going to do it. Quite often it's the why that's missing, and it's the why that is the heart of motivation and engagement. So this is why we're pulling all our staff together and we're talking about what our vision is. What are the school vision and values? What are our vision and values in early years? How does our ultimate future priority align with our vision and values? How do our policies and procedures support our vision and values? How does our curriculum align with our vision and values? How do we include all stakeholders in the development of our vision and values? So that is your why. It's the heart of everything you're doing, and that's going to be the thing that pulls everybody together to enable you to get to that future. So think about that idea of a golden circle. We're really good at the what. We know we're educating children. We're really good at the how. We're really good at the curriculum and teaching. But do we know why? What's the why in your setting? What is the purpose, the vision, the values? What do we all believe in? Is that making sense? Yay! And then, don't forget those 7 key features of effective practice, which I've added in here. When you look at it in Development Matters, it doesn't look pretty like this. Salford have made it into a really nice, pretty poster with a giraffe on it, because that's what we do in early years, isn't it? We stick a giraffe on it and it becomes early years practice then. But you have a look at some of those key points there. So you can see best for every child. We've got disadvantaged backgrounds addressed straight away. And then we've got that comment, children at least 4 months behind their peers. And I actually think it's a lot more than that now. We've got a reference there to trauma. We've got reference to SEND. We've got high quality care, which is point 2, which is really about your practitioner knowledge around child development. We've got curriculum, the top level plan. And then if you look at the bottom, we've got depth in early learning is more important than covering lots of things in a superficial way. And then we've got reference to play, we've got reference to children's interests. Moving on to pedagogy, again, we've got reference to environment, we've got reference to different methods, and we've got references to play as well. Assessment is not about lots of data. It's about knowing your children, knowing child development, and knowing your curriculum. And knowing where we're taking children next. This area here, executive functioning, this is to me, this is should be one of your priorities. I'm not going to dictate that. I shouldn't say that, should I? Because you'll be thinking, oh no, I need to put that in the action plan. You don't, but this really is something we need to be looking at, because in my experience at the moment, children don't have regulated role models. They're not having the healthy lifestyle that leads to the development of the prefrontal cortex necessary for them to have good regulation. And we really need to think about that goal. It's a goal for a reason. It's a goal because it's going to give children the skills that they need to access the next phase of their education. So it is an area to really think about. And then of course we've got partnership with parents, and I love the final bullet point under partnership with parents. It's important to encourage all parents to chat, play and read with their children, and that really is you know, for me, that is all I'm asking of parents. Please talk to your children, so we don't have as many children with American accents or who can't talk, or you know, oh, it just made me laugh, you know, I'll put it in the trash, you know, or who have parents who don't even give them eye contact, you know, when they pick them up because they're on the screens. And you know, there are some situations that are really quite heartbreaking at the moment, aren't there? So I love that. I do love that, and I think it's worth sharing with parents as well. So let's have a think about your self-evaluation. We're going to think about those 7 areas. We've got intent, implementation and impact. We've got working with families and communities, effective use of adults, transition, and leadership and management. So let's think about self-evaluation. What do we know about self-evaluation? Has everybody had training around what good self-evaluation looks like? No. Right, so we'll do a bit now, shall we? Is that all right? Yeah, okay. So good self-evaluation should include these things. It should be purposeful. So it should have an action. It should lead to something. Okay, we're not just going to slap things in an action plan because the head teacher said you've got to have your action plan ready for next week. Oh God, what am I going to put in there? I know, I'll put tidy up the outdoor area and buy some new books. We're not doing that. It has to be purposeful. It has to be meaningful. It's linked to the impact on children. So it's going to have an impact on children. It has to be context informed. So think about those strengths, the gaps and the barriers. And it has to be realistic. So if you have significant barriers, you know, you are not going to get 100% of your parents attending read with me sessions if your parental engagement is rock bottom and you actually get no parents at the moment. So you need to think really carefully about your barriers and how you're going to overcome those barriers and what that realistically will look like. It needs to be evidence informed. So we need to go back to data. We need to go back to assessment. We need to look at the current year ones and what their experience is, because that's going to help us to formulate our practice this year. It needs to be collaborative. So you're not just going to come up with it. It's going to be your leaders. You might involve your children. You might have something to do with parents, governors. You know, it could involve a whole host of different people. And it needs to be connected. So it's integral to whole school priorities relating to development of all aspects. So it feeds into your whole school improvement planning. It's got something to do with that whole improvement process. Okay, so that's what we're going to have a quick look at now. But I want you to just think about your priorities and how they align with those priorities on the screen there. Is it purposeful? Is it a purposeful priority? Will it lead to action? Is it meaningful, context informed, evidence informed, collaborative and connected? Okay, so just think about those areas. Do we have any questions at this point? Is there anything any burning questions in your mind? Are we all right? Everybody okay? Yeah? You sure? You staying with me? Oh, you're all lovely, aren't you? Aren't you good? You're giving all this time up, and you know, all I've done is just yammer on at you. You're very good. Right, so let's have a think about purposeful evaluation. So the purpose of the evaluation should be shared, and as Amy said, you know, we're using this idea of action research. So we're thinking about plan, do, study or analyze, and then take action. And we are going to involve as many people as possible in that whole process. But the purpose will lead to some kind of action. So what action do we need to be taking? So, for example, if we've identified staff interaction as an issue, and I love the way before Nasheen said she doesn't say play with the children, she says interact with the children. I think that's it's a really good way of putting it to other adults, isn't it? Because we're encouraging that two-way process. If that is one of your if that's one of your priorities, we can let the staff have a look at what's happening currently. They can identify the current position alongside you, so we're drawing them into the whole process of purposeful action. We can allow them to be involved in identifying what good interaction looks like, and therefore evaluating themselves. So what do I need to do to improve? Let them come up with a set of actions and timescales, and then come together to assess progress. I've got a few schools where we're doing things like this because interaction seems to come up every single year, and we've started keeping floor books. Does anybody do floor books with the children? Yeah, well, I do floor books now with the adults. So when we're learning something as a team, we record what we're learning in a floor book, and we keep going back and looking at where we started and what we now know. And we go through that whole journey together. And I know initially when I introduced it, adults were just like, oh, really? What? Now, when I say, right, it's your turn, Joe, it's your turn to record in the floor book this week, it becomes very competitive, and we end up with like pop-up pages, you know, and glitter and all sorts of things, because everybody likes to have the best floor book page. But when we go back and look at where we started and some of the things that they were saying, you know, good interaction constitutes a good interaction, to where we are now, they can see the improvement that they've made, and they feel really good about it. It really motivates them. It really gives them something to move towards, and it is a really collaborative process. And I find more action is taken because we're involving the whole team. So I'm not saying, you know, Joe, you need to improve your interaction, so I'm going to send you on this course and then your interaction needs to improve. What we actually do is on a weekly basis, we talk about interaction for 5 minutes at the beginning of you know, a phase meeting or lunchtime or whatever, and we say, what have you done this week that aligns with the agreed actions that we're going to take, until all of those actions then become habit, because we're looking for repeated actions, so it then becomes yeah, of course I can, yeah. Yeah, we do include support staff, because one of the things I say to schools that I work with is we must include support staff in phase meetings. So schools will commit to paying support staff to stay for half an hour and receive feedback and become part of that collaborative process. But it's really impactful. It does really work. So thinking about it in terms of the questions that you might find in the, or you will find in the self-evaluation tool, you can see an example of a question there. So under intent, we have this statement: the indoor and outdoor learning environment is stimulating and encourage children to safely explore risks and challenge their own learning. So we're going to evaluate that statement on that scale. So are we starting, or are we absolutely excellent, or somewhere in between? Okay, so you're going to pick out where you think you're sitting. And what I tend to find is people tend to be really harsh on themselves, which is great, because by the time we come to the end, we've got some great progress there, haven't we? So be as harsh as you want to be, but be very clear about the actions that you are actually going to be taking. So thinking about that statement in relation to purposeful, we might be looking at our collective vision for children. So what would the ideal look like? And therefore, what actions do we need to take to get to that ideal? And it could be a reorganization of some part of the environment. It could be retraining adults how to use certain parts of the environment, or retraining children how to use certain parts of the environment. So, you know, it's going to lead to some kind of action. That is the point of that whole area. Does that make sense, folks? Yeah. We're then going to think about meaningful. So is your evaluation meaningful? Is it going to link to the impact on children? So if you have a look at that question there, we've got learning activities. Oh, sorry, move on, that would help. So learning activities provided for children in early years across the academic year and over a day consistently match the aims of the curriculum. So let's have a think about that. Are we starting out, or we got a brand new curriculum? Or is it absolutely excellent and our good level of development at the end of the year is 98%? Anybody got 98%? Give me away. You've got 90 something. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So having a think about what meaningful might look like. What do we need to do to improve that, to make it as close to the future ideal as possible, so that we get that meaningful impact on children? So what exactly are you going to do? And this could be around improving knowledge of child development, for example. So do your adults know the children well enough to know what aligns with their developmental stage? Do you know that the DFE have produced a whole free child development training course? Right, if you Google DFE early years training or child development training, there are 12 units, and it takes you through each of the areas of child development, the areas of learning, and you get a certificate at the end of it. So if you've got any brand new members of staff joining you in early years who don't know anything about child development, that's a great place to start, and they can work their way through those units. They're given information, they watch videos, they read little snippets, and they take little multiple choice quizzes. But it's free and it's out there, and there's loads and loads of information in it, so it's really, really good. Do our adults know how to make a best fit judgment? So can they assess that child holistically? Can they look at all aspects of the child's development and say exactly, oh, look at that, Amy's on it already, she's put a link there on the chat. Flipping heck, Amy. Can they say exactly where that child is in relation to the benchmarks that you have within your curriculum? So if we're expecting all our children to be here by October, can they scan through those statements and say, yes, the child best fits against those areas, but they may have this as a weakness, so we may need to address it in this way. So it's going to lead to that meaningful action, which will have an impact on the children. One of the things I always say about staff is they need to have that knowledge of the child development and the curriculum, and they need to use the process of notice, diagnose, respond. So we're noticing And then we're making that diagnosis. Does it align with what we would be expecting at this point in the year for our children, or in this point in their development for our children? And what response do I need? Do I say that child is keeping pace with what I'm delivering and therefore I'm going to let them crack on? Do I say they're falling behind and therefore they're not on track and I need to address it? And then how do I address that? Do I do it through play? Do I take them for an intervention? Do I feed it into my next lot of planning? So you are noticing, you're diagnosing, and then you're deciding what the appropriate response might be. But do your staff know how to do that? Because that would be an expectation of mine, that all staff could actually feed into a child's educational journey in that way. We're looking for our self-evaluation to be context informed. So if we think again about the self-evaluation questions, if we think about impact, through the delivery of a well-planned, child-led and challenging curriculum, the pupils leave the early years foundation stage as independent learners with transferable skills needed to start Key Stage 1. So thinking about your context, or the children's context, what strengths do the children have that you can use to support their development of transferable skills? So do they come into school highly motivated? Are they very curious? Do they have good physical skills? So what do they have that you can actually use? Where are the gaps? So what are they missing? And then what are the barriers? So what's going to prevent them from getting there? You know, if we're wanting really good physical development, most of our children live in high rise with no access to outdoor play? So how are we going to overcome that barrier for them? And it's knowing that context, isn't it? So that you can then put in the right actions to have that meaningful impact on the children. Okay. Do adults know the children well enough? Do they have a good picture of that child's context? And then, is it evidence informed? So is your evaluation evidence informed? And we're thinking about all the evidence that you're gathering continually throughout the year, the previous evidence that you have from assessment information that you might have from your profile or your baseline information, and pulling all of that evidence together to give you a starting point. And then you can pull in those actions so it has a meaningful impact on children, it's informed by context, and you are heading towards your ultimate reality. So if we have a look at the question there, we've got effective self-evaluation leads to concerted and successful actions to improve provision and outcomes for all children. So what evidence do we have that self-evaluation is actually leading to effective improvement planning? Do we see effective improvement year on year on year? Do we have the same priorities on our early years action plan every year? And I'm going to say something here. Outdoor learning. Who's got outside on their action plan every year? Every single year. Is it time we put it to one side? You know, everybody it just seems to be there every single year. Outdoor learning. Unless somebody's going to give you £1 million, it is what it is. So let's make the best of it. Okay. Okay, so having a think about your evidence informed evaluation, we're also thinking about what that data is telling us, and we're thinking about the national picture, So we might be taking information from nationally published assessment information, and we're going to filter that down as well. So we're going to filter it down to a school level. What does that mean for our school? And then what might that mean for this particular cohort? So we're going to use that information, use that evidence to inform some of the actions that we might take to get to that meaningful reality for our children. We need to be looking at where those gaps are lying. There is a reason why the DfE have identified that number one area, the 7 key features of effective practice, the best for every child. There is a reason why they have identified trauma, disadvantage, and SEND. So we need to be fully aware of that and look at what's happening for those children and what's happening for those children in our settings. So it is valid to look at nationally published information as well as our own school information. Does disadvantage matter? Yes, it does matter, and we really, really need to get on top of disadvantage. I know the DfE is saying children are at least 4 months behind. I'm actually seeing a lot more gaps in more areas, and I would say that children are so far behind when they're coming from those disadvantaged areas, disadvantaged families, disadvantaged contexts. And we have to be really clever in the way that we're addressing that. And quite often, I'll say it again, quite often it is about paring back what we're delivering. So we're delivering the right thing to support the gaps and the disadvantage. Does it matter where you live? Unfortunately, it does matter where you live. We do see changes in data depending on where children come from. So it is really important to just bear that in mind as well. It can be because we don't have access to external agencies. It can be to do with the general context of children, but just be mindful of what that national picture looks like. And then, of course, your own data is key. Now, I'm going to show you some slides, and you're gonna hate them, but I'm only showing you them as an example. So this isn't stuff that I'm expecting you to do, right? So just brace yourselves. But this is not your expectation. This is not an expectation. So you might be looking at your data in these ways. You know, you might have a curriculum that identifies different points across the year, so 8 points across the year. You might be looking at the percentage of children that are sitting at those different points as the year progresses. You might then be picking out anomalies in information and asking questions about where that data looks like it's changing or not changing. So you might be saying, who is that 3%? Because that picture doesn't make sense. You might then break it down, and you might be asking questions about certain individual children. So what's happening for those children that don't appear to be making much progress, that are not moving on in any way? So WQ, you can see there. You might be asking questions about children who appear to be going backwards. So A, B, and C and D appear to have drifted backwards a little bit, as does IL. So you know, we're just picking up those questions, aren't we, and asking the question, what's happening for that child? And there could be something incredibly valid that's informed the journey for that particular child, but we still need to be asking the question, what's going on and what are we going to do about it? So it's knowing. I think the key message for me here is, do you know what that journey looks like for your children? The reason I really want to push this is because sometimes we do get to the end of the year and early years staff will say to me, oh yeah, we really know we're on top of all of them. We get to an assessment point and that predicted 70% falls to 42%. And it can be, you know, oh, well, we were very surprised that actually they didn't reach the goal in these particular areas. Well, nothing should be a surprise, should it? You should know what that journey is looking like for every single child. Okay, so self-evaluation also needs to be collaborative. So we're going to include as many people as we possibly can in that collaborative process to make sure that all of our children are taken account of. I'm just looking here because I think I might have highlighted the wrong little box on the next slide, and I do apologise. So we're looking at a collaborative approach before the children move from foundation stage into key stage 1. Staff meet to exchange information about progress, ability, SEND needs to know any other information relevant to the wellbeing and development of individual children. Information is used to group children, plan the curriculum and set future targets. So we are collaborating with the next teacher to ensure that transition into key stage 1 is absolutely seamless, and children will hit the ground running when they get into key stage 1. I still have a lot of year 1 teachers who say to me, you know, they can't do anything. The children can't do anything. They're supposed to have reached a good level of development and the children can't do anything. And I'm like, well, you know, they must know something because we wouldn't have assessed them there at that point. And I think sometimes year 1 teachers need to tell children what they know. So there needs to be that joined up approach. So we're saying to the children, yes, you do know how to write your name. This is what you did at the end of last year, and this is what we're expecting this year. So children are made aware of what they've been taught, and we're making those links and connections so that they can hit the ground running and continue on that journey. And then, of course, it's connected to whole school priorities. So we may have all adults have dedicated non-contact time is used for liaison. This ensures all staff have a clear understanding of concepts, vocabulary and information to be covered in learning activities and continuous provision. We're linking that to effective use of adults in the setting, and that will feed into whole school priorities about building the staff team and making sure that the whole of the staff team are developing and becoming the best practitioners they can possibly be. Right, so I've just taught and taught and taught, and I've taught you through the 7 areas of the self-evaluation and tried to relate them to the 7 areas of effective self-evaluation. So purposeful, meaningful, context-informed, evidence-informed, collaborative and connected. Now, some of those things that I've picked out are things that I'm noticing are fairly typical areas that tend to come out in early years action plans. So we just want you to have a little mull for a minute. So just sit and think, what's going on in your action plan? What are you thinking might come up from your self-evaluation? And then think about what your ultimate reality needs to look like. So what is it we're hoping to achieve by the end of the year that will be the ultimate in amazing practice? Okay, and try and pull those 2 things together. So if you've got outdoor learning on your action plan, what does the ultimate look like? Be realistic, you can't have £1 million. So just think about what that's going to look like. Okay, and then I'm going to ask you to be really nice and share some of those priorities with your team online now. Okay, so who would like to share? Who's going to kick us off and just say what their priority might be?
I really want to look at staff interactions with children across all areas. Going back to those three things that you said, they need to know the child, they need to understand child development, and they need to know the curriculum.
Yeah, I think that's really valid. And I actually think, have you got a new team this year, Nasheen?
No, we haven't, but we've got a combination of some characters that have been here for a long time and some very new people. And I think it's trying to find that common ground where they're all connected. So yeah, it's like oil and water at the moment at times.
Oh gosh, oh poor you. It's really hard, isn't it? It's really, really hard.
But genuinely, they're good people, so we will get there.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's so difficult. I used to find this was the biggest thing for me in early years, getting the team on board, getting them to understand certain things like the importance of the emotional environment in early years, that whatever you're giving out, the children are soaking in. So if you've had a bad morning and you come in and you look miserable, they soak it in and they assume it's about them, don't they? You know, they haven't got any barrier, they've got no way of bouncing that bad feeling off them, so they just assume it's about them. I'm going to show you the next slide here because I used to use this book. You can get it on Amazon now. It's about 99p. It's called Fish, a Remarkable Way to Boost Morale and Improve Results. And there's a whole thing built around this fish book. It's called Fish Philosophy. It's based on the Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle. Has anybody ever been? It's a big tourist attraction in Seattle, apparently. Right, so I've never been, but I really want to go. You've got to watch some videos of it on YouTube after you finish because they are absolutely hilarious. These guys apparently in this fish market, they were getting to work really early in the morning, you know, like 4 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, it's smelly, it's cold, and they decided they needed to come up with some principles to make life a little bit easier. And they came up with these 4 principles. And the first one is play, which is brilliant for school because we should be making the most of every day and having fun, shouldn't we? Children are hilarious. If you're not seeing something every single day in early years that makes you belly laugh, something's going wrong, isn't it? They are so funny. I bet you can tell me some stories from the last couple of weeks. They're just hilarious. So we should be having lots of fun, shouldn't we? School should be about joy and about fun. Has anybody read any of Greg Bottrell's books? Yeah, Can I Go and Play Now is his first book, and the second book is School and the Magic of Children. And those 2 books are about joy. It's about the joy of being an early years teacher. And this is what we need to take hold of. There's no other area in education that are allowed to have as much fun as we have. And school should be about joy in early years. What we're doing in early years is a big PR exercise, isn't it? We're capturing them. So they think education's fantastic. And then they get into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, don't they? But by then we've got them. So they think school's brilliant. So we should be having fun. And the adults should be having fun with each other. Children need to know that school is a joyous place to be with fun people who love them. So it is absolutely valid for you to be having lots of positive interactions between you all. The next one is be there. So be present. Don't think about what you're having for your tea. Don't think about the fact you've got to do your planning. Be present with those children. Be fully in the moment with the children. And that really works for children. But I tell you what, it really works for staff as well. You give them your full attention and they feel very, very valued. Think about that Maslow's hierarchy of need. We're making them feel safe. We're making them feel loved. We're raising their self-esteem so they can see their potential as really good practitioners. The next one is make their day. So whoever you do interact with, make them feel really important and special. And that's easy with the children, but sometimes it's a bit harder when you've got your tricky members of staff, isn't it? You know, when they come in moaning about things and you you kill them with kindness. But you've got to make them feel really special. Like you care about them and you want them to do really well. And then the final one is choose your attitude. So we choose to come into school in that joyous and positive mood, ready to tackle the day. I used to have a baggage drop. So I used to say, right, we've got 10 minutes to moan before I open the doors. And all the staff would say, oh, I've got no time to do this. And, you know, we've got to take that display down. The head teacher wants this, blah, blah, blah. And I can't stand that parent. And then when we'd had the 10 minutes and everybody had got everything off the chest, everybody felt relief and smiled, and we opened the doors, and the children came into a very positive positive environment. But that, I think, is a biggie for me. And Nosheen, I really sympathise, because it's very hard pulling that staff team together, isn't it? When everybody's got different experience and everybody's got different priority, we've got to be the person that brings everyone together. And quite often you just think, oh, I've had enough. They're never going to do what I want them to do, but you've got to just keep going, haven't you? Keep persevering. What has anybody else got on their action plan? What are you thinking might come up from your self-evaluation that will go into your action plan? Claire, you're on mute. Claire, are you talking to us? You're on mute.
Sorry.
Oh,
yeah, I haven't thought about particular actions yet, but I think it's going back to what you said about purposeful and not just sort of going through the motions of, you know, like we all do outdoor learning or writing, and actually just almost strip the action plan right back as well. So I haven't thought of what's going in it, but I think I'll probably be more mindful of what will be the actions, I think.
Yeah. And I think once you've done your self-evaluation, when you've gone through each of those statements and you've been really clear about where you sit on that scale, you'll have a better picture of what your priorities might be. And hopefully it's not going to be, you know, like 84,000 different priorities. It's just going to be 2 or 3 really solid priorities that you can action quite easily. Anybody else want to share bits of their action planning?
I've got on mine so far to effectively support SEND children and children with EAL as well. I think that's something at the moment we're seeing a really large increase, and being a small school, I think we need to sort of reframe how we think about those children and how we can differentiate and include those children and plan for those children, but also at the same time looking at the rest of the class too. It's a balance, isn't it? So I think that's what I want to focus on.
Yeah, and I think that's great, but that is a massive area. So think about what that's actually going to look like in your setting, who it's going to involve, what the ultimate impact is going to be, because I think you're right. We've got a rising number of children with need and a reducing number of agencies who can come into school and actually support us. So it's about upskilling you and upskilling your staff, isn't it, to do the right thing for the children. Yeah, anybody else want to share? No, everybody feeling okay so far? Right, does anybody have any burning questions or anything that's bothering anybody? No, nobody's waving, nobody's put anything in the chat, I don't think. Oh, that's quite good, isn't it? Don't forget, this process is about empowerment. This is about you, and getting you to a point where you feel like the best leader you could possibly be, that's having the most impact on the most children in your setting. It is about empowerment, and I want you to pass that empowerment onto your staff as well. So think about that hierarchy of need, how can we ensure that all of our staff see their own potential? You know, how can we make sure they feel safe, that they feel like they belong, that we're raising their self-esteem? When I'm working with staff and I'm talking about children, I talk about those 4 areas of competence. So we start as being unconsciously incompetent. We don't know what we don't know. We move to conscious incompetence. So we realize there's loads of stuff we don't know. And quite often that's where staff sit. And when children sit there, they fall into Maslow's layer of safety, or they fall out of Maslow's layer of safety. They feel unsafe because there's something called writing that everybody else seems to be able to do that they can't do. And then you hear children say it, don't you? I can't write, I can't read. They'll say those things out loud. And you know, they're in that point of being consciously incompetent. So we have to raise their self-esteem and their feelings of safety so they can tip into the next quadrant, which is conscious competence. So they can have a go at it. It might take a bit of brain power, but they can have a go at it. If they do it enough, they become unconsciously competent, so they can do it without thinking about it. But most of our children spend their lives flitting between being consciously incompetent and consciously competent. So consciously incompetent is quite damaging to their self-esteem, and then conscious competence is quite hard work because they have to think about everything they're doing. So we've got to sort of support that process for our children. Now, we have to support that process as well for our staff, because some staff will be at that point of feeling consciously incompetent. They'll know that you want something from them, but they're not quite sure what it is and how to do it. So we've got to raise their self-esteem so they can see themselves as achieving. So just consider that if you've got any kind of adult priority, or if adults are the thing that you're going to be focusing on, then just think about, you know, that whole idea of raising their self-esteem and making them see that they do have potential. We can also use that idea of context with our adults as well. What are they good at? What are their strengths? Let's use their strengths. Where are their gaps? Let's try and support the gaps. And what are the barriers? So what prevents them from improving? Okay, folks, everyone feeling okay? Lovely, lovely. Right, Amy, am I passing back to you now to have a look at the dates? Do you want me to move the slides, or are you going to do it?
I'm hoping that it will swap over to me.
Okay.
Has that worked? Hey, I think so. Has that worked? Yeah, thanks, Sam. Cool. So you can see a set of dates in front of you. Is that correct? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that was fantastic. Thank you very much for taking us through that, Sarah, and so many insightful thoughts as well around why everyone is doing what they're doing. And lovely to hear everyone's kind of stories and their reasons for becoming a leader. I love that. I love that grabbing hold of early years. Absolutely. Grabbing hold of the start of children's journeys, that is. So absolutely brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Sarah. I'm just gonna spend a few minutes just sharing with you kind of the process, where we go from here, what happens next, what you're involved in. There are a couple questions about self-evaluation, and I've just explained in the chat. You will have had emails this morning with regards to that. But essentially, this process will take you through the full academic year. For many of you, what it will do is set up a kind of usual way of working, a cyclical way of thinking about how you review what you've achieved, what you and enable your focus to kind of then set an action plan for the future and building that into your usual way of being every single year. So obviously you've all attended today. This is your launch event. In the next few weeks, we will be meeting myself and Helen and Sarah We'll be meeting to think about who amongst the group could potentially be leading quads and being coaches, and some of you may be offered the opportunity to do that. Once you've logged on to your self-evaluation, and when you leave this, do go and have a look at that email from Evaluate My School with all your details, and contact us if there are any problems with it whatsoever. It's really self-explanatory of how you go onto Evaluate My tab and work your way through that self-evaluation. And I believe, Helen, is that correct, that people have been asked that they will undertake that self-evaluation by the 25th of October? And the reason for that is that when we go into the next session, the planning for impactful change, that's all about what you do next. So self-evaluation leading into action planning. And so if the self-evaluation is not done, you might find yourself a little bit behind right from the start and struggling to kind of catch up with that. So the self-evaluation with your senior team done by the end of October. We are then doing a session with the coaches that are identified, and a training session with those coaches, which we will let them know about. And then our next session all together on the 6th of November, where everyone's coming face to face, Helen, aren't they, in Moore Hall? That's correct, isn't it?
That's right. It's Moore Hall. It's 12 o'clock for lunch with a 1 o'clock start, and then it's 1 till 4 at Moore Hall. And lots of parking there for anybody who hasn't been there before. It's a very nice setting in Cookham, but we'll send out the address, etc. But lunch at 12:30 for a 1 o'clock start.
Thank you, Helen. And then through November, those meetings will start where you'll come together as groups of schools with your coaches and start to think about how you're going to work your way, first of all, supporting one another in that action planning process. And then those groups will work together throughout the year on supporting one another to move through your action plans and kind of achieve that success towards the end of the year. So once you've completed your action plan, all of it is online. It's all within the same system. It's really, really straightforward, and it keeps it all together for you. You can export elements of it as well. So if you want to take it offline to share with people, you're able to do that. What you will then get through December and January is an online feedback. I will be doing that feedback myself for all of your schools. And that, again, will go straight onto the system. So self-evaluate, do your action plan, have some feedback from your action plan from myself, and then you'll have a chance to have a call to talk through that feedback in January, February time. And throughout that whole process, the idea of that system is that your action planning stays live. So every time you update it and you've achieved something new, you've achieved an action plan, you log on there, you can update your self-evaluation anytime if you want to. But what we look towards is kind of work through a year, and then towards the end of the year, you'll go back, review, and see how much you've progressed. And sometimes that doesn't always look like you think it will, because sometimes through the course of the year, you've realized that actually what you thought might be something you're really confident in, you now understand a little bit better. And so you actually want more development in that area. So they doesn't necessarily always mean that numbers go up when you reevaluate, because actually you understand more through the process of doing it and the training that sits alongside it. And then at the end of the year, we've got provisional data, 17th of July. There'll be an opportunity to come together and think about what you've learned during the year and how you will use that to plan for the future. So those are the key sort of dates in the process. Earlier, you'll get all of this information, so don't worry about trying to take notes off it now or anything else, but it just lays out the program for you. All of you will have access to attend those 7 events that are on there as kind of the minimum of what you will have available to you. That first session, October the 17th, is led by myself and is about thinking about the team that you work with and how you set them up for a successful year ahead. So the 7 sessions, all related to the themes within the program that Sarah's kind of taking you through. The system leader events are for, I think mentioned earlier, for the leaders of the system. So in this case, Sarah, I would expect to attend. There'll be lots of other leaders across the country that attend those, MAT leaders, local authority leads, all the people that are participating in this early years program and leading it for their locality. So again, a number of sessions there. So this is our digital network. So you will, if you take a look at that QR code. Again, you'll get this coming through. That will give you access to a login where you can log in onto our digital network and explore a whole host of resources, training events, and different activity that are going on across not just our early years program, but other programs under whole education and other areas of interest. So there's a whole raft of stuff around curriculum, for example, pedagogy, etc. So please do have a look at that. And finally, I share this little clip with you just to remind you about how important your role is. And I mentioned earlier the work that I do in Djibouti, and this was one really, really golden moment for me that just reminds me about why we do what we do. I hope it plays. A gorgeous little boy discovering scissors for the very first time in his life. And it really is remarkable when you kind of think of everything you have heard today about the importance of setting children up for the rest of their life and learning, and the impact you have, and think about what happens when children don't have that. Those moments of pure joy that you experience when you're teaching somebody something for the very first time is so, so special. And just remember, I think Sarah said it very earlier on in the session, you are growing the next leaders, you are growing the next doctors who will be treating you. And just think about that important role that you have and how crucial it is, and how you have all grabbed hold of that. And hopefully we'll take you through a really exciting journey of development over the next year. So thank you very much, everybody. And I didn't mean to play that again, but we can see him again. Okay, so finally, questions from anybody?
Amy, it's not a question, but on behalf of us all, can we please thank you all, Sarah, Amy, Michelle, and also Sarah Cottle, for the time and effort you've put into this, preparing for this. I'm not an early years specialist, but I've got a lot out of it. So thank you very much from us all.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much, Helen. And Meredith has popped into the chat a little Google form for you all to complete, just by way of self-evaluation. So be very grateful if you can do that for us. There we go. Please complete the feedback form. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation, your questions, your contributions during this morning, and we will be in touch with you throughout. And at the very least, we will see you at the Impactful Change event in November. But hopefully I'll see lots of you on October the 17th at our first CPD session as well. Thank you all very much. Is there anything I've missed, Meredith?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
So it's more like so basically I'm signed up under our Senko and I just need to change it over to me. So I'm not actually Lizzie Hogan.
I think did you pop that in the chat, Lizzie? I think, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, but she's getting all the emails and stuff. But do you want me to put my email in there as well? Because it's all.
If you pop your email in the chat, and then Meredith could make a note, and we can make sure that you get all of the information rather than your Senko. Thank you very much for that. Sarah, okay. You were going to add something, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely morning. I love talking early years. I hope you can tell. And if you need anything, give us a shout. It's been really nice to meet you all.
And if anyone doesn't have an email for the system login for Evaluate My School, please do get in touch and let us know.
Thank you. And apologies, Meredith, for calling you Michelle. Should have been Meredith.
Great.